Deep in the emerald heart of Guyana's jungle, where the canopy blocks out the sun and strange sounds echo through the humid air, lies a clearing that once promised paradise. But on November 18, 1978, this remote settlement became the stage for one of the most chilling mass tragedies in modern history. A place where nearly 1,000 souls would meet their end in a single afternoon, following the twisted commands of a man who convinced them that death was their only salvation. This is the story of Jonestown, where utopian dreams transformed into an unspeakable nightmare. Act 1. The Prophet's Promise. The story begins not in the steaming jungles of South America, but in the seemingly ordinary corridors of American society during the turbulent 1970s. James Warren Jones, a charismatic preacher with piercing eyes and a silver tongue, had built something remarkable in Indianapolis, then San Francisco. The People's Temple wasn't just another church. It was a movement that promised racial equality, social justice, and a family for the lost and forgotten. Jones possessed an almost supernatural ability to read people, to find their deepest wounds and offer exactly what they needed to hear. To the elderly, he promised care and purpose. To minorities facing discrimination, he offered acceptance and power. To the young idealists of the era, he presented a vision of a perfect society where love conquered all divisions. But behind his benevolent smile lurked something far darker. Those closest to Jones began to notice unsettling changes. His sermons grew increasingly paranoid, filled with warnings of nuclear war and government conspiracies. He claimed to possess healing powers, staging elaborate fake miracles where chicken organs were passed off as cancerous tumors he'd miraculously extracted. His followers, desperate to believe, chose not to see the deception. The control began subtly. Members were encouraged to donate their possessions, their homes, their life savings to the temple. Children were separated from parents to be raised collectively. Dissent was met with public humiliation sessions, where Jones would berate and break down anyone who questioned his authority. Sleep deprivation became routine, with mandatory meetings lasting until dawn. Food was scarce, keeping followers weak and dependent. Then came the whispers of something extraordinary, a promised land far from the corruption and racism of America. Jones spoke of a tropical paradise where his followers could build a perfect communist society, free from persecution. He called it the People's Temple Agricultural Project, but everyone knew it by its informal name, Jonestown. The advance teams that arrived in Guyana in 1974 found only dense jungle and swampland. They erected dormitories, a medical facility, a school, and at the center of it all, a large pavilion where Jones would hold court. The settlement took shape slowly, carved from the hostile wilderness through sheer determination and backbreaking labor. Meanwhile, back in California, Jones' behavior grew increasingly erratic. He became obsessed with surveillance, convinced that government agents were watching his every move. His drug use escalated, a mixture of amphetamines and barbiturates that left him paranoid and unpredictable. The inner circle of the temple lived in constant fear of his explosive rage, never knowing what might trigger his wrath. By 1977, as negative media attention intensified, Jones made his fateful decision. It was time to move the entire operation to their jungle sanctuary. Hundreds of devoted followers sold everything they owned and followed their leader into the Guyanese wilderness, leaving behind families, friends, and any chance of escape. Act 2. Paradise Lost. The reality of Jonestown bore little resemblance to the paradise Jones had promised. The oppressive humidity made every breath feel like drowning. Insects swarmed constantly, carrying diseases that racked the settlement with fever and dysentery. The work was grueling. 12-hour shifts in the punishing heat, with minimal food and water. But worse than the physical hardships was the psychological prison Jones had constructed. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, officially to protect against wild animals and hostile locals. But everyone understood their true purpose. Letters home were censored, phone calls monitored, and any attempt to leave was met with violent consequences. The jungle itself became another wall, thick, maze-like, and deadly to anyone foolish enough to venture out alone. Jones ruled from his cabin like a mad king, his voice booming across the settlement through loudspeakers mounted on every building. Even in the middle of the night, his rambling, drug-fueled monologues would jolt residents awake. He ranted about imaginary enemies, about the beauty of death, about the nuclear holocaust he claimed was imminent in the outside world. The children suffered most of all. Separated from their parents and housed in communal dormitories, they were subjected to brutal punishment for the slightest infractions. Some were lowered into a dark well as punishment, left to scream in terror until Jones decided they'd learned their lesson. Others were sexually abused by Jones himself or his trusted lieutenants. The adults, broken by exhaustion and malnutrition, felt powerless to protect them. But perhaps most chilling of all were the rehearsals Jones called White Nights. In these rehearsals, without warning, sirens would wail across the settlement, and everyone would be herded into the central pavilion. Jones would announce that enemies were approaching. Sometimes the CIA, sometimes Guyanese forces, sometimes undefined conspirators bent on destroying their perfect society. The only solution, he declared, was revolutionary suicide. Large vats of poisoned drink would be wheeled out. And Jones would command his followers to line up and drink. Children would go first, their parents forced to watch as they consumed what they believed to be their final moments on Earth. Only after everyone had drunk would Jones reveal it was merely a test, a drill to ensure their loyalty when the real moment arrived. These macabre rehearsals happened dozens of times, each one wearing down the residents' psychological resistance. As 1978 progressed, the outside world began to take notice of disturbing reports coming from Jonestown. Relatives of temple members, concerned by the lack of communication, began pressuring the government to investigate. The most vocal was a group calling itself the Concerned Relatives, who claimed their loved ones were being held against their will in the jungle compound. Their campaign eventually reached Congressman Leo Ryan, a California Democrat known for his willingness to investigate controversial situations personally. Ryan announced his intention to visit Jonestown, bringing with him a small delegation of reporters and some of the concerned relatives. Jones's paranoia, already at fever pitch, reached new heights. He saw the visit as the beginning of the end, the moment when the outside world would finally destroy everything he'd built. Act 3. The Final Act. November 17, 1978. The congressman's plane touched down at the small airstrip outside Jonestown. Ryan and his delegation were greeted with forced smiles and carefully choreographed displays of contentment. Jones, despite his deteriorating mental state, managed to play the gracious host, showing off the settlement's agricultural projects and introducing visitors to apparently happy residents. But beneath the surface, terror reigned. Jones had instructed his followers to present a perfect facade, knowing that any sign of dissent could trigger the final catastrophe he'd been planning. Some residents, desperate for rescue, managed to slip notes to the visitors, pleading for help. Others whispered urgent warnings when Jones wasn't watching. As the day wore on, cracks began to appear in the performance. Several families approached Ryan's delegation, quietly expressing their desire to leave Jonestown. The congressman agreed to take them back to the United States. a decision that sent Jones into a barely controlled rage. To him, their departure wasn't just defection, it was betrayal of the highest order. November 18th dawned humid and oppressive, the air thick with tension. As Ryan's group prepared to depart with 16 defectors, Jones' facade finally crumbled completely. He ordered armed guards to follow the delegation to the airstrip, claiming they were escorts for protection. But those who knew Jones understood the truth. This was an assassination squad. At the remote airstrip, as the small planes prepared for takeoff, the guards opened fire. Congressman Ryan fell first, cut down as he tried to help others board the aircraft. NBC reporter Don Harris and cameraman Bob Brown continued filming even as bullets flew around them, capturing their own murders on tape. Photographer Greg Robinson was also killed, along with Patricia Parks, a defector who'd finally found the courage to escape. Back at Jonestown, Jones gathered his followers in the central pavilion for one final white night. But this time there would be no reprieve, no revelation that it was merely another drill. The vats contained a deadly mixture of cyanide-laced flavor aid, enough to kill everyone in the settlement. Jones, his voice eerily calm over the loudspeakers, called it their revolutionary act, their final statement against an unjust world. The children were forced to drink first. Parents held their babies as they were given the poison through syringes. The cries of the dying children filled the air as the adults, many now understanding there would be no escape, began to consume their own doses. Some resisted, but armed guards ensured compliance. Those who tried to flee were shot down at the settlement's edges. In less than an hour, over 900 people lay dead in the tropical heat. Entire families were found embraced in death, their final moments spent trying to comfort each other. Jones himself was discovered with a single gunshot wound to the head. Whether self-inflicted or administered by a follower remains unknown. When Guyanese authorities arrived the next day, they found a scene that defied comprehension. Bodies stretched as far as the eye could see, many in neat rows as if they'd simply laid down to sleep. The silence was broken only by the buzzing of insects and the distant calls of jungle birds. Nature, already beginning to reclaim the clearing where so many dreams had died. The world struggled to understand how such a tragedy could occur. How could nearly 1,000 people be convinced to end their own lives and murder their children? The answer lay in the gradual erosion of free will, the systematic destruction of individual identity, and the terrifying power of a charismatic leader who weaponized love, hope, and desperation. Jonestown stands as a haunting reminder that the line between salvation and damnation can be razor thin, and that even the noblest ideals can be twisted into instruments of unimaginable horror. In that remote jungle clearing, a community that began with dreams of equality and justice ended in mass murder, leaving behind only silent witnesses to one of humanity's darkest chapters. The ghosts of Jonestown linger still, whispering warnings about the dangers of blind faith and the terrible price of surrendering our capacity to question, to doubt, to think for ourselves. Their voices echo through time, reminding us that paradise promised by those who demand absolute loyalty is often nothing more than hell in disguise. This was the Jonestown Massacre.